Welcome back to Legacy Builders, everybody. We've got some super special guests on today. We've got my aunt and uncle on here. Aunt Tami and Uncle Nick is what I refer to them as. But I'm super excited to get into this conversation. And my dad's been able to build a relationship too with them. And so anything you want to add about them?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. And a lot of times, so Tami is my wife Jody's sister. So these are my in-laws, and it's really awesome that in-laws that we have a good relationship. There's a lot of in-laws that don't have such a good relationship, and so I'm just appreciative of the friendship and relationship that we have with Nick and Tami, and they're just awesome parents. They're awesome people. And you're going to hear some of their story today and just learn about legacy. And so thank you guys for being on and taking time out to share some of your wisdom with us.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yep, we're glad to be here.
So I guess start us off. Just tell our listeners a little bit about you guys. Who you are, your family, and then kind of transition into your background. Maybe how you grew up and such.
Okay, let me start.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm Tami Dolphens and Madison's aunt and Eric's sister-in-law. I am Jody's one of her younger siblings. Jody's the oldest of 5, and so I am one of the younger siblings. Nick and I live here in Papillion, Nebraska. We grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. We live here in Papillion, grew up in Ralston, which is where Madison grew up also, and attended high school there. And right now, we have 3 boys that we're raising here at home. We have our son, Sam. He's 13 years old. Luke is 11. And William is 8 years old. And so they definitely keep us on our toes. I work as a physician assistant. I also coach our kids in gymnastics and have started helping coach diving, which is something we'll get into a little bit later on as far as part of my background. My background growing up was playing a lot of sports and being involved with everything possible, which I have kind of carried on into my adult life too. Just continuing to be involved in the community with our church, with volunteering at school, coaching the kids, and then trying to balance that with work and family life.
Yep. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so Tami and I have been married for 17 years. Started dating in college, but knew each other in high school. I have been in the home building industry since then, and also have coached and done a lot of playing catch and being the neighborhood dad out there organizing games of football and baseball with all the kids and camp outs in the backyard. We just really feel blessed to live in a neighborhood with a lot of kids everywhere. So it's a fun place to grow up. And we're very busy, but for good reasons, and we feel blessed.
Yeah, it's great. As Aunt Tami, as you mentioned, you have 4 other siblings. Why don't you guys go into a little bit about like your growing up story, like what that looked like having 4 other siblings? And Uncle Nick, I know you were really close with your family, so if you guys want to kind of just go in about what that looked like for you.
Sure. Yeah, I think what you'll find out is our upbringings were very similar in values, but just very different experiences. I think, and your siblings, I think, play a huge role in that. Not only the number of siblings, but whether you have, sisters or brothers or things. And I was fortunate to come from a family of 5 kids, and I'm 4th out of 5. And so those of you that maybe have come from a larger family, you kind of always feel like you're not the oldest, you're not the youngest. You're not even really the middle. You're just kind of a number. And so that's always been part of my growing up, is that I was always kind of just the 4th out of 5. I had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. I think coming from that large family really shaped who I am now as an adult and as a young person. I think when you fit into that role, and part of our family life growing up too, we were a very active family. We played a lot of sports. With that, we were also very competitive personalities, I would say. And so when you talk about stories from growing up, a lot of times it is, has to do with some type of interaction with somebody where you were basically trying to win or trying to be better or trying to, beat out your sibling for whatever it was that, you know, you were fighting over something. And so a lot of those stories and lessons, I think, come from learning to work with people and dealing with multiple personalities of, you know, everybody has their own different personalities. And so, you know, my story, I guess, from growing up is I just felt like I was very independent. I felt there's a lot of busyness around me with having 4 siblings and all of us playing a number of sports and doing all sorts of activities. Everybody was on the go, different places. And I always just felt like I had to just step up and make things happen. You know, if I wasn't one to just sit back and wait for someone to either wait on me or bring me something or ask me how I was doing. It was just always, hey, this is, you know, if you want to do it, you got to do it for yourself. And so I just felt like I established a strong independence. And I think also with that kind of built confidence with who I am and the decisions that I've made, because you were not really just a number, but you were just kind of part of the crowd. And if you wanted to stand out, you had to decide to make that happen on your own.
Yep, and my experience, like I said, Tami said it well. We had very similar values within our 2 families, but the upbringing was different. I had 2 younger sisters. One is 2 years younger than me, one's 5. And so we had a pretty quiet house. I was not in a neighborhood with 39 kids like my kids are. So, you know, I had a friend down the street and a friend up the street, and you know, have a friend over. And I liked sports. I played baseball a lot, and you know, played in basketball growing up and did some other things, but I like to draw. I mean, we were at home a lot, we traveled a lot. We always went out to my grandparents' farm, especially in the fall because it was hunting season and my grandparents' 2 birthdays. So yeah, it was different. It wasn't but it was similar in the fact, like my parents didn't hover and dote on us, you know, like you do see sometimes nowadays. So I think it was because my parents were from big families. My dad had 8 kids in his family. My mom had 6. I think because of the way they were raised, they didn't hover over us or micromanage us or you know, it was just kind of a, kids need to be behaved, and you know, I need to know where you're at, and that was about it. So,
and I think I just want to add one thing I find like is that relationship building with your siblings and within your family. I think, you know, looking back at the way that we were raised differently, with Nick having more of a quiet home where his sisters played together and Nick was off drawing and kind of really being independent and doing his own thing, you know, and their house being much quieter than our house. We were, you know, that there's a TV show on now called like The Loud House, which is totally like, looking back, how I felt like our house was. It was just loud and there was just a lot of energy. And but I think looking back as an adult, the relationships that I see that Nick had, you know, with his sisters and with his parents, it was a lot more of sitting down and talking about things, and, you know, and having, you know, just a little more downtime and a little more quiet time where you could, you know, really listen to one another and discuss things. Whereas I felt like, you know, in our home growing up, it was so busy and it was loud. You know, you didn't really ever sit down and have really these meaningful discussions with one another, but you showed your love differently. You know, you showed your love for your siblings by supporting them in their activities and cheering for them and being proud of them for their accomplishments. And, you know, and that's how you showed your love. You know, you didn't necessarily say it like I would see in Nick's family. You know, they were so much more comfortable speaking love and speaking about relationships. And that was, you know, not something we necessarily did, but you just knew that everybody loved each other, and you knew that they cared about each other because they were there for you, and they would push you, you know, and they would encourage you to be better.
Well, one thing too, Tami always tells a story, you know, when I was in high school, and Tami would be over, or a group of friends or college or whatever it was, but like what my sisters would go to bed and we'd say, well, love you, night. And it about made her fall out of her chair.
Hug his little sisters and tell them good night.
I don't know if I hugged them. Well, we definitely said, well, I tell you what though, it's that there's a legacy. My cousin Nikki she passed away in high school, and she was a year younger than me. She had a brain tumor. And that, going through that as a family with my dad's 7 brothers and sisters, I mean, that changed our family. And the sadness was temporary, but the long term of it was we were a much closer family, because you don't know when, you don't know if you're going to have somebody for another year or so. So that's when, yeah, every time anybody left any gathering, you'd hug them and say you love them. And my Aunt Terry still does that. So those things are, really rough, but it can really, it can make somebody outside your family really notice the strength.
Yeah, that's powerful. So with that said, so this is Tami, you just explained kind of this high energy family. Nick, this more emotional, demonstrating calm. Now you guys get married, and I think what does that look like? Because I have seen where you guys have, if you're on opposite ends, I have seen for example, Tami coming this way and Nick coming, a kind of a meeting in the middle. So this is very awesome what you guys have developed in your relationship and example. And but it wasn't easy at first. Tell us, what did that look like in the beginning? You're talking about this, the differences, but you're still gonna start to merge this together. What were some of those conversations like? What were some of the challenges? How did you get where you are today?
Yeah, I think it is easy until you have kids. And that's really when I noticed separation. And any marriage and relationship does have a honeymoon period where you don't see anybody's faults, and everything is eye to eye all the time. And then you just get past that, and you start noticing the personality differences. And I always joke, opposites do attract. If somebody knows Tami and they know me, I think we are the very good example of opposite personalities that attract. But if you look at that as a strength for your household or a strength for your relationship, Tami is a go-getter, and doesn't turn any opportunity down. And that's helped me, and that's helped me be a business owner, and it's helped me be encouraged to go coach and do a lot of things that, I probably would have done those anyway, but it really helps you have a solid person backing up your decisions and picking up things because you're busy, going and accomplishing what you want to accomplish. So, and there has been times where we just agree that we look at things differently. I think you just having that maturity in your relationship of, yeah, Tami, I just don't agree with you on this. And we just kind of have to leave it there, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I mean, it is 50-50.
Yeah. And I mean, when you asked who kind of what the discussions are like, we've been married for 17 years, and I feel like, yeah, the discussions change all the time, and they always just change based on that stage of life that you're in, and you're faced with, when you're first married, there's that honeymoon period of, it's just like you're dating, but now you're living together and you share a bank account, and you're starting to see a little bit more into the future as to, oh, this is like, not to say like, you're getting into a long-term relationship when you get married, but I think the realization after you've lived together for, a year or two, and then you've, bought a house together, and then you had to get a new car, and then you had to like decide, how much money you want to put into savings, or, all those bigger decisions that you realize you're doing together. I think you don't realize how different you are until you're forced to make those decisions. And I think the discussions have evolved over the years too. And it has taken us 17 years. I mean, we're still not perfect at it. I mean, there's still a lot of times that we disagree, and we have to acknowledge that we are, we have a different perspective on things. He sees something differently than I see it. And it's not ever about trying to change that person or change that person's viewpoint. I think it's really, you have to understand where they're coming from, and what their background and their experiences and, what their history is, why they might see something that way. So yeah, the discussions, we always would pride ourselves that we really don't we really don't have arguments, and it sounds cheesy to be like, oh, we don't argue, but we don't, we disagree on things, and I would say there's times where it's more of a disagreement than other times, but
A high level conversation. Like,
Yeah, that's what we call high level discussion.
I like that.
yeah, but it's like you have to at some point you have to decide it's not about the issue itself, it's about your perceptions, and your experiences that you've had in the past really make you look at things differently, and you just have to figure out what works. And sometimes what works is agreeing to disagree on something and decide what's best if it involves the kids, or if it involves a business decision, or the house, or the yard. Something silly like that. But sometimes you're like, well, if it's that important to you for these reasons, then okay, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's why Nick has his garden. When people are like, you guys have a great garden, I'm like, that's Nick's garden. Like, yeah.
Just lets me know it doesn't look nice a lot of times. That's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
It's so powerful. If most people early on in their relationships understood that, there'd be a lot more longer lasting relationships, I think,
I agree.
in my opinion. So that's
what I would want young couples to know in our family or yours is I think just the more transparent you can be with anybody in your life, the better. People get pretty guarded, and I think that's human nature. But I've learned professionally, kind of, the role as running a home building company, you're often an arbitrator in trying to dissolve high tension type conversations, high level conversations.
Yeah.
And I think if you just break it down and really explain to somebody, hey, I get why you would think that, but I'm just going to tell you honestly and transparently why I think what I think. And then you just realize, like Tammy just said, people are just looking at something from a different angle. It's the whole, there's a car accident and 4 people have 4 different descriptions of what happened. That's just how the world works. So just being super transparent and open and honest with your view of things has really helped me.
That's so good. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but because I was young, but you guys waited to have kids and you didn't want to have them right away. Is that right?
Yeah, we waited 4 years with Sam.
Yeah, about 3.5, 3.5, 4 years. Yeah.
And in that time, you kind of traveled and just like kind of figured out who you guys were as a couple. At least that's what I remember from when I was young.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we I think part of one of the things too is we both, and people, I say nowadays like we're super old, but like
well, we kind of
but we got married when we were 24, which I think was pretty much the norm then, and I think, while most people are waiting longer to get married until their late 20s or even 30s, they really have a well-established career and they've just kind of lived on their own for quite some time. Well, we really hadn't done that, other than going to college, and I went to grad school, and Nick went into the workforce after college, but he still actually lived at home, while he was working before we got married. And so we both we didn't really have these grand independent lives that we had gone off and lived independently, but we did that together. We wanted to go experience that and kind of experience being on our own as a couple. And so we did that those first few years of being married. And now that we have kids, we look back and we're like, what did we even do with our time? Like, we had so much time.
We paid off loans.
Yeah. Paid off student loans.
Yeah.
Now we have go ahead.
No, I think too, it was nice. We'd known each other and been dating since we were 19. So to have that time as adults and married people, it was nice. And I don't fault anybody for how they choose to do that, but that felt right for us. And those were good years. And I have said this over and over. I've loved every phase of our marriage, and everyone's kind of tough because it kind of, you have to reinvent yourself, right? Like hey, I've never been a parent and Sam's coming. And that kind of freaked me out, honestly. Tammy was ready, but I'm a little more reflective of a person, and I probably overthink stuff internally. And yeah, that was a big thing, as I think it should be for anybody. But then, we're in the point now where the kids kind of are way more independent and don't really need you hanging out with them constantly. So you're just constantly learning a new phase of life. So that's fun. It's fun when you look at what's good about each phase of life. And that phase before we had kids was neat to go through with Tammy.
Nice. So now here you are, you've grown up, you've gone through those phases, right? Now you have kids, and let's talk about legacy a little bit. So Madison and I, in lots of times in our conversations, we started, people don't just grow up and be like, oh, we're going to start building a legacy now. And so one of the things that we've just discovered over the last couple of years, and I don't think this is new really to anybody, but I think we're at this point in time, for whoever listens to these videos down the road, we are going through what was known as the COVID season. And I think it's really helped us reflect how busy we were and how out of focus we've gotten on family. And so when I talk to a lot of people, like, yeah, we need to really get back to these values and focus on family, and not just family, but the next generation. And so Madison and I would just talk, and that's why we started the Legacy Builders, because we just want to help the next generation. There's things that I have learned that I want to pass on to the next generation. And that's what we want to hear from you guys. So as talking about legacy, what are some of these values that you have learned? I know you guys, and you can maybe share the story. You guys have made some trips or read books. I don't remember exactly the story about some things that you've learned about your history, your family history, and some of the legacy things that you've talked about. And then we'll get into some lessons later. But some traveling. You guys have done some traveling, learned about some of your history. Share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll start with our first trip, which has transitioned into another one that Nick ended up taking with his parents. But we actually took a trip about 4 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago, to the Czech Republic. My heritage, my dad's mom, her parents were Czech, or Bohemian at the time when they came over to the United States. And what mostly sparked our interest in learning our history relates to food. It sounds kind of silly, but one of the things with my grandma B, who Mary Bernth, was that she would always bring over baked goods. She would bring kolaches and strudels and stuffed zucchinis and stuffed peppers, and would have all these traditional things that when we heard those words or we saw that food, it made us think of her, and since she has passed away, it makes you think of her even more when you notice it. You're like, oh man, I really, I miss when she used to bring those over, and we would have these stories about, who could eat the most kolaches, and again, coming from the competitive side, it's like, that's what you remember about the kolaches is, how quickly everyone would eat them and how you would like hoard them and protect them and try to not let people steal your kolaches that you wanted. And it was just such a fun memory that I had, that I wanted to try to bake some of the things that she had made. And there were no recipes, and I remember baking with her before she passed away, and I would try to write down the recipes and I would ask her about them, and she'd say, oh, there's no recipe, you just, the recipe for cooking kolaches or baking kolaches was you buy plums when they're on sale, and then you bake them until they're done. Like, I remember asking her, like, well, what's the temperature on the oven? Is it 325? She's like, it's whatever your oven needs. Well, how long do you bake them? Like 20 minutes, 40 minutes? Well, you just bake them till they're done. And so you buy plums on sale and you bake them till they're done. So it was, that honestly like motivated me to want to learn more about, like, I love this. I love that there's no written history, and you have to dive in and you have to have the conversations and you have to ask the questions, like what you guys are doing with this podcast. There's not necessarily a written history. You have to talk about it and have the conversation. So, that that was fun as far as motivating us to start researching that bohemian side. And Nick really got into cooking, and I'll let him talk about his side of the family, but he loves, he's a great cook, especially like in the winter, because he likes to make these chicken dishes. And so he got this Belgian cookbook, you know, this original Belgian, because part of his family's from Belgium, and started researching all these recipes. So I would honestly say that the food and trying to like, he would find these authentic old world recipes. And then it was fun. We would read about like, well, you know, why did they use leeks, you know, or why were, you know, these root vegetables always used? And then you further learn that history. So that's a long segment about food, but that's what motivated us to want to learn more about our history, because it's not written down other than recipes and cookbooks. And so 4 or 5 years ago, we went to the Czech Republic, and we got this great deal on this super affordable trip. And we thought, since we're getting such a great deal, let's spend a little money and do a little ancestry research before we go. And so we were able to hire somebody to go into the libraries and do a little bit of research for us, and then actually drive us around and be a driver to go to these villages outside of Prague, and take us to visit some different locations where our ancestors had been born and lived. And the neat thing in Europe is, you know, families live in the same home, and it's just passed on and passed on, just like your podcast, just like your episode you had with my parents, talking about that home and passing along the generation to generation. And so it was really cool to know that multiple generations had lived in this same home. And we actually had an address to a home because of some letters that my grandma had kept. And so we went to that home, knocked on the door, and we had a conversation with this woman who is actually our cousin, a true biologic cousin. Our great grandmothers were sisters. And so, you know, it's really fun to learn the history and be able to, well, like we said, when you have disagreements and you want to understand where someone's coming from, you know, and thinking about, why would they make this decision? You know, why would our family develop this tradition or have this type of legacy? And if you learn more about the history and the times that they lived in, and to actually see the places that they lived was fabulous. It was really, really cool. So in that mode, Nick actually ended up taking a trip a year or so later, right?
Yep, to Krakow with my parents. And, you know, I don't know if you're done.
I'm done. Yeah,
but
go ahead.
What made me interested in family history was the food. Yeah, was for sure the food, but also when I started having kids, when we started having kids, I really became interested in lineage, you know, like the legacy builders, like you're not the bottom of a family tree anymore.
Right.
So it really makes you look at the world differently. And you know, kind of the premise of what you're doing on this podcast, I really got into all of that. So, you know, it was interesting for me to find out the Polish side of my family. They sent their sons when they were 14. My great grandpa was 14, and they sent him to America, and nobody ever saw him again in Poland because the war was happening and it was horrific. And they were just trying to like save their kids' lives. Because the poor people got drafted. Weird. Your number always got picked when you didn't have money to go fight in these wars. And you know, learning about your family history and other family members who are interested in that, I just think there's so much more appreciation for how you got here if you know that type of information. And all families have stories like that. So it just makes you appreciate it. Both of my families were really, really full of faith, which I was always appreciated. And I think going through experiences like that makes you rely on your faith. So that helped me understand that more. So that was really neat. And the next thing, the concept I always found interesting is, like, I think we're, for most families, the last generation that is going to say, yeah, I'm Belgium and Polish. My kids have so many different nationalities. And then with, you know, Tammy's mom being adopted, there's a little unknown, like I think that generation is going to often say, yeah, they're American. Now, the Dolphins family is a Belgian name, but like if Luke's asked by his spouse someday, I mean, is he going to list 7 different nationalities? Probably not. So it is neat to make sure they have some of that heritage and they know a couple words in Czech and they know kolaches are important to our family. And I like that we know the 2 towns the Dolphins families are from, because you can really lose that if a family doesn't focus on it. And that's where these family values came from and the stories that created those family values. So that's important to me. I kind of feel bad for people that don't think that's important, just because I think there's so much value there for kids to know where they came from.
I think heritage wise too, like what Nick said, you know, it gets so diluted when you have all these different nationalities. And while you want to give time to all of them, I think sometimes it's difficult to really give the time to all of them. But if you can embrace one of those cultures that really resonates with you, you know, and that kind of becomes your identity, you know, like Nick said, you know, when our kids are married, what are they going to say? Like, oh, I'm Belgian, or I'm Czech, or I'm Danish, or I'm, you know, what it's, the concept doesn't really exist anymore. I think that you know, really identify. And I think if you can just embrace one of them, and it's whatever resonates the most with you. I think it doesn't have to be all of them, you know, and I find I love learning, you know, about the history of Czechoslovakia and learning about that Bohemian history. Whereas I have a cousin, Jeff, who's very fascinated with the Danish and the Viking history. And so he's really done a bunch of research in that area. And then Nick loves the Belgian and the Polish, you know, I think, and yeah, so it's just fun to embrace that. And then I think you see those values in the cultures of people that came here. And I think that's where you think like, look at how brave these people were, or how hardy and how tough, looking at the amount of Bohemians and Polish people who settled in the Midwest, you know, in the harshest of climates and the harshest of lands, and what made them, you know, survive and what made them want to do it. And I think they have that grit and that stick-to-itiveness where now we don't have to go out there and turn the prairie into fertile land, right? But you can show those skills by participating in sports and activities, or, you know, succeeding,
or enjoying gardening,
or you know, succeeding and kind of pushing yourself because you are a hard worker and you have that ingrained in you. You know, I think part of it is there's that nature versus nurture. You know, you can raise kids to be however you want. I mean, you have the power to, you know, give that nurture of what you want them to find important, but there's also a source of nature that, you know, works in conjunction with that, you know, nurture and the things and the lessons you're teaching them for them to be successful in life, whatever they choose.
Yeah, those are such amazing points. Just like, I mean, to even for my generation and beyond, to not lose that history and to not lose that culture side of thing. I love that you guys are doing that. I think that's so cool. And Uncle Nick, I know you've mentioned that you started like a journal to actually pass that down to your boys and keep some of what you're learning and stuff today. Talk to us about how that started and how that cultivated.
Yeah, that started just.
Is it one journal?
No, I have probably 57 journals laying all over the house everywhere. In my truck, everywhere.
Wow.
Keeps a lot of notebook, which is awesome. I'll let you go.
Yeah, you know, and I don't have it organized. I don't. I just, if I think of something that I don't want to lose, I write it down. And it's not, you know, chronological or anything. I've tried to organize them over the years, and I just admit defeat, and I think I'll do that someday. I have a lot more time on my hands, like Lon and Jean have.
And do that someday.
Yeah.
This is where our personalities are so different. I think
Right.
he's able to just write and record and document, and it doesn't matter the order. It doesn't matter whereas for me, I have a hard time getting something done if it's not exactly perfect, you know, how I want it. But tell them about.
Tammy's been given journals, and it's like anxiety producing for her. They all have 2 sentences in the first page.
No, I get to usually about a month. That's it.
But so I kind of got to the point where I'm just going to write something down when I don't want to forget it for future generations. And if it's at Thanksgiving and I see my dad's uncle who's in his late 80s and he tells me something about himself growing up, I write it down right away when I get home. Just to have, those stories are lost. They will absolutely get lost if somebody's not keeping those records. So I'm pretty unofficial about it. I just, date, who I heard it from and why he's relevant. And, I journal about things we're going through as a family. And mainly, what caused me to do that, my grandma Rose, who's 92 and going to be 93 in 2 weeks. She lives out on the farm in Iowa. And she has written 2 or 3 sentences every single day for about 60 some years. And so you go out to the farm and she has these stacks of ring notebooks, and it's just a subject notebook like you would have in school. And it talks about, who came out to the farm that day. And there's always a little note about the weather. She took lunch to Grandpa and Uncle Dwayne, and they had a field lunch because harvest was going well. And like, those don't seem significant in the moment at all. But my aunt typed them all up one day. So we all got 2 volumes on those big spiral binding notebooks. And it was like all of little family memories of 40 years of my mom growing up. So wow. That made me think, gosh, if you could leave your, and if your kids think that's great, who knows? But if I had that from my grandpa Dolphens, I would have loved that. So I just thought, maybe down the road, somebody will think this is interesting to look through. And it's, it's not self-serving. I don't write a ton about myself, but just, it's neat to have a bunch of stories from the family.
Yeah.
So you learned this from your ancestors, or did you also read about this in a book? Me and Madison.
He had to bring that up.
What?
You talked about this competitiveness, so Madison and I are going to expose.
Oh yeah.
Our competitiveness.
Oh, there was a book I read too. Is this? I looked up this. Yeah, I probably told you this. So there's this. We know the 2 towns in Belgium that the Dolphins family are from, and these are tiny little towns. So I like to read, and I was looking up, are there any books from this area that are like famous, because I just wanted to learn more about this part of the world. And there isn't. Like these towns, you just would like get taken over by a new country every 5 years. Like that's the history of this part of the world. So, but there was one book where a guy received all the journals from his grandpa, and he's a professor in Belgium, and he didn't even look at them. He left them in a box for like 30 years because he knew once he started reading through this, it'd be like all consuming. So he took all of his grandpa's journal entries, and a lot of them were from World War I when he was in the trenches. And he wrote a book about his grandpa's life based just from the journal entries. So I read that and I thought it was super, super cool. So I had already been journaling when I read that, but it definitely re-upped my
took it to the
zest
next level.
for it.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
So now we're both right.
We're both right. Yeah. So, we were rehearsing, and we got to this point. We're like, I think Nick learned this from his ancestors. She's like, no, I'm pretty sure. I'm like 99% sure that he read the book. I'm like, well, I'm 99. So like,
I appreciate the competitive juices in your family.
Nash and I are very highly competitive. We like
the same thing.
Yeah. So we're glad to know that we're both right.
Good for you guys. I'm glad, because otherwise this might have been very awkward.
I think that gave him the permission to have multiple notebooks everywhere in the house and in his truck and in his office.
Did you, or you just admitted defeat at some point?
Yeah.
Like, this is just something I'm gonna have to deal with.
Yeah, but I'll benefit, I love it. I tease him all the time about it because it honestly,
I have one right here with all my notes in
it's
it.
a little ridiculous.
Nice.
My notes from the podcast.
But it's fun. It will be fun to look back on, and it's those little things and those little moments that I'm too busy to stop and really pay attention to, just because I'm stuck in the busyness of the way I was raised, was always busy and always on the go. And I have carried that into my adulthood and getting things done and getting it done efficiently, that I'm more interested in the efficiency and the organization of things than really being more reflective and thinking about things. And that's why we make a good pair.
Right.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I am curious too, like, so you are a mom, a coach now, a PA, like help Uncle Nick manage his business. Like, how do you manage all that? Like in the busyness and stuff, like what have you learned from that, from managing that?
Well, and can I add on one more thing? Because one of the things that especially speak to young women, Madison's age, because young moms, young women, because I see this pattern right now that these young women specifically coming out of college and think that they have to have their whole life is all perfect right now, and they have to have it all together. Mm-hmm. And now here you are, probably thought that same thing, mm-hmm. and now here you are 17 years later married. Mm-hmm. Reflecting back on that, speak to the women, how have you managed all that, to this point, and reflect back. Yeah.
I mean, that was me. I mean, everything was planned out. It was organized. It was, if it wasn't planned out, we hadn't talked about it, it wasn't going to happen. I needed, plenty of time to make sure it fit into everything just perfectly. And honestly, I think, for probably my first 8 years, probably 7 to 8 years, things were running on that path of, I was in grad school and graduated as a physician assistant, and we got married. And then I worked for, 3 years as a PA. I worked in pediatric cardiology and, really established myself in that area of medicine, and then had a baby. And but because I established myself in that area of medicine, I started doing a lot of teaching and speaking at conferences and traveling. And I got involved in national organizations, and I continued my pattern of do everything and do it all. And I think, the opportunities arise for a reason. I think things come up, and you have to not be afraid to take risks and try new things, even if it maybe doesn't fit into that perfect little box. I ended up leaving my job in clinical medicine to go do some teaching, some full-time academic medicine for a while. At the same time, I was balancing having 2 children and all of my involvement and everything. And I got really good at scheduling. I got really good at organizing and coordinating. And really it was between having our second and our third child when I kind of had that reflective time of really stepping back and saying, I'm meeting all of my goals, I'm accomplishing all these things, and it's so exciting to be able to do all of this stuff. But, am I missing, what am I missing here? And I think a lot of it was I was getting caught up in the busyness of things, and I was seeing Nick trying to be more reflective in things. And I think that's a time where you step back and you say, is this really the lifestyle that we want? It may be what I planned out and thought that I wanted. But that's when, somewhere around after we had 3 kids, when it got really, busy, is when I ended up stepping back from my full-time work and started working in more of a part-time role, which again, you learn from that also. I honestly think working part-time, I became more busy than when I was working in just one single full-time job, because I don't know how to be unbusy. And so I would say, I have all this time, I'll volunteer at the school, and sure, I'll help with the coaching, and Nick's business side of things needed, a little extra, just some extra manpower there. And sure, I can help do that. And finally, you find yourself spread so thin, that one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older and have continued to want to be the go-getter and want to be the one that accomplishes everything and can prove to everyone that I can do it, I think I've been able to reflect and say, look, I do a really good job at a lot of things, but I'm still only able to do it about, 85%. What if I could do fewer things and put my whole heart into it and give 110%, and so I think in the last, 3 years now? I'd say the last 3 years we've
getting better over the last 3 years.
We've also made the conscious decision that our family is growing and they're growing up, they're growing up quickly, and that time is not forever. You don't have these kids at home forever. They grow up and go away, and you have to instill those values in that time and make the time for that. And so in the last few years, we've changed our lifestyle a little bit more to where I'm still doing lots of things, coaching and PA and volunteering, and but I'm doing it at a lesser extent. Not really lesser, but I've put family as on the top tier, rather than my career, rather than my involvement, and instead of just trying to prove to everybody that I can do a good job at everything. Like it's more of, sure, I can do those things, but I want to do a really good job at parenting my kids right now. And I also want to do a good job at our relationship, because as your kids get older and as you get busy with your work, you still have to give time to your relationship, and I think you have to make that conscious effort to do it. And so, yeah, I do tend to get stuck in the busyness of life. And Nick has been an amazing balance for me to really bring me down to earth and say, look, it's okay. You don't have to have every piece of laundry folded, in order to relax, or you don't have to, work all weekend on Saturday and Sunday if you're making a PowerPoint or on a presentation or something. You need to have boundaries. And so I think becoming, a mother of older kids and learning to balance that, I think it's just setting boundaries and creating priorities. You just kind of find, it took a lot of years to get there. Not everything can be number one priority, like I was coming out of college and grad school, and even, having babies and raising kids, you're trying to do everything perfectly, and it's okay to not be perfect, and it's okay to try something that you don't know how it's going to go, and to kind of accept that. So,
well, thank you so much for that, Aunt Tami. Really, I mean, coming from somebody who tries to do a lot and involve myself in so much like that means a lot coming from you. And so I just wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah. And so now, Nick, tell us about, so in this, what is it like to, with a highly competitive, motivated self-starter, high energy wife, and you're more laid back. What is that? And not just laid back, but it's not to mean that you're not successful, because you're involved in a construction company. You started another company recently. And so it's not to say that you don't have goals and you're doing some stuff. It's just your demeanor and your personality is different in accomplishing those goals. So what does that look like for you? And I also see how in those the things that you guys are both doing, you're also in essence building a legacy for the next generation, because we don't know which one of the boys are going to want to be part of the businesses that you're developing or whatever you guys are developing as a family and putting together. So maybe speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, so Tami and I both like to read. I would say, we don't read more than anybody else I know or anything like that, but we're always have a book going, and I read a lot of nonfiction, and a lot of them were business books. And I don't think I'm as reflective as much as like when I sit down and write in my notebook or something. Like I just really, really want to be intentional. That's kind of the term I keep going back to. And it's, Warren Buffett has a quote of, it's what you say no to that makes you successful more so than what you say yes to. And I really do believe that, we can be flattered by people constantly wanting things from us. And like Tami and I've had that conversation. Like Tammy's like good at everything she tries,
Right.
because she'll put her heart into it. Well, at some point you can't do that every time somebody calls you on the phone. Like you're going to run yourself ragged. And we have been through that a little bit in our relationship over the years. And I think it's working now as good as it has. But like, what do you want to be known for? For me, we just both turned 40 within the last year or two here. Like it makes you reconsider what you want to be known for professionally and personally. And it's just a good chance to reevaluate what's important. Like what's important to me is not what all of my friends and colleagues think I should be doing. Like what intentionally do I want to be good at? So I keep notebooks everywhere. Sorry to keep talking about this, but I have a monthly page, my yearly goals, how that breaks down into monthly goals, and a weekly page of am I hitting my monthly goals. And it's down to go painting outside with Will one time this week, play catch with Sam twice. Luke and I are going to do, tie some flies because that's special for Luke. So, sit down on the back porch with Tami and have a come. If you don't, at least in my lifestyle, and at least from what I've found, if I don't live with that level of intentionality, your time is just going to get filled up with other things. So what is the most important stuff to you and your family and your career? And then make darn sure those things are getting checked off before, like, we don't watch much TV. Like that's not important to me. Like, and I have very good friends that are wonderful people and wonderful parents, and they list off 1,000 hours worth of Netflix stuff. Like, I have no idea how you would even watch that much, but like, I don't, it just doesn't fit into my week. So, and I don't think I'm doing anything amazing, but I really do try to be intentional with how I live.
And Nick does a great job reminding me when I do get caught up in the busyness of things. If we have an extra busy week, or I've said yes to too many things, and I have, deadlines and a lot of things on my plate, he'll say, how does this fit in? How do these things fit into your 5-year plan or your 1-month plan? And I usually roll my eyes at him and am like, I don't want to talk about this right now, but he's right. I mean, he's accurate for me to really step back and be like, I know I said yes to all these things, but does it really serve a purpose? And I always think purposeful, being more purposeful with what you're doing. And so he does a good job of recognizing when I do hit that stress level or, overwhelmed, of stepping back. And instead of him really, he's learned that he doesn't really offer like, what can I do to help? Like, because we've fallen into I do these things well and he does these things well. So it's not so much that he needs to do something for me, but just his reminder usually is to be like, hey, I know you're busy, but how is this fitting in, so it doesn't necessarily fix the problem immediately, but it does open things up for a conversation, and it stays in the back of your mind.
All right. So, well, we're so glad you said yes to fit us into this podcast. And what you guys just shared today is just super awesome. Wrapping it up, Madison has one final question for you.
Yeah. And I did just want to make a comment too on Uncle Nick. That's so powerful that like your weekly goals
so good.
Actually like have those like relationships like aspects in them. Cause we always talk about too, we're like, if you don't have goals for your relationships, then I mean, that's also an area where a lot of people forget they need to make goals. And so I just wanted to comment like that is so, so powerful.
Well, even today, I was just working yesterday and I was just reminded, because I haven't been as intentional lately on that. And I'm like, I think about my kids a lot, but I don't tell them. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So I just sent a text to Madison just today and to Riley. I'm like, so I appreciate you sharing that too, because that's a reminder to me to continue to be intentional again on those intangible things, those relationship goals, not just, I'm highly motivated with my other goals, our podcast goals, or, my construction goals, all that stuff. But those relationship goals are key. And I hope everybody listening really, really caught on to that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
But to wrap up, we ask all of our guests on here just a final question, and that's, what is the greatest lesson you've learned so far, or the best advice that you would give to the next generation coming up? So whoever wants to start, if you want to answer that.
Right, or do you want to
I
start?
can go. I'll say mine. You have more notes than I do. Your notebook. One of the things, I feel like my advice has evolved over the years, but in the last few years, especially in the different roles that I've been playing and doing a lot more teaching, college students and graduate students, and coaching and working a lot more with young people, my advice, I think, has really evolved to just be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think so much of the younger generation is people are too afraid to step out of their comfort zone. Everybody likes to just, sit on the couch and have their social media or their gaming or their video or their, couple of friends that they want to talk to, and they're not willing to volunteer to help at church or even coach a youth sports program or, anything, go on a podcast, and answer questions. And I think people are too afraid of being uncomfortable. And I just would encourage the younger generation to just get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's going to open up so many opportunities and doors for you. And then you just learn about yourself and you build confidence. And then each time you're a little less uncomfortable. So
That's so good. So good. Uncle Nick, what about you?
Yeah, I guess mine's equality. And I read a good article a couple years ago about the best thing you can leave your kids with is resilience. I remember growing up and I thought, man, I'm almost an adult. Like I'm pretty sure I'm going to know almost everything here pretty soon. and it was my first job I had where I went, I was there with a bunch of other adults and I was the new, 23-year-old. And it hit me pretty hard. Like, these people are trying to figure stuff out just like I am. And they're way older than I am. So, I mean, it isn't like you've said, Eric, you don't just arrive. You don't just have it figured out. Like we're all helping each other figure all of this out. So as a parent, the transparency of like normalizing the struggle, I really appreciate, I listened to your podcast and you talked about the foreclosure that you guys were dealing with. Like, I want my kids to know all of that stuff. And did that knock people in our family down? No. You go through life and you put up with some stuff and things don't always work out the way you want, but you get to wake up the next day and start over. And that's the blessing we all have. Hopefully, most of us have that, but that's life. That's life, getting knocked down and standing back up. And if you have resilient people and resilient kids, they're not going to be afraid to take those risks because they know they can handle it. So that, if I had to boil it all down, I think it would be to just create resilience and leave our family with that.
Yeah. Those are awesome.
Yeah. Very, very, very good. Love it.
Well, we want to thank you guys again just for coming on the podcast. We really, really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for doing this. It's a great, neat idea, and it's just been a lot of fun to listen to and follow.
Yeah, we appreciate your support and again, all the wisdom and information you shared. I know our listeners will really appreciate it. And like Nick, what you just said, I mean, we sharpen each other by listening to other stories and, each other, we go through things and we hear that, they went through it and they're still here and they're still around. And those are the great life lessons to pass on to our kids. So
I agree. Totally agree. Well, thank you both. This has been fun.
Yep.
Yes, thank y'all. Well, and thanks to everybody who's watching. We will see you next time on Legacy Builders.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the Legacy Builders podcast. We would love to hear from y'all. Go tag us on Facebook and Instagram and let us know what your biggest takeaway from today's episode was.